Imagine sitting at a fancy restaurant, enjoying your dinner, when suddenly 5 dangerous men burst in, heading straight for a billionaire CEO. No security, no one brave enough to step in, until a quiet waitress steps forward. What happened next shocked every single person in the room. Cameras caught the unbelievable moment. This ordinary woman unleashed a hidden skill that flipped the fight upside down. Trust me, you've never seen a story like this before. Welcome to BrainFuel, the place where real-life stories inspire, shock, and move you. If you love powerful stories that prove heroes can come from anywhere, hit that subscribe button now and join us. You don't want to miss what happens next. Stop right there. The words slice through the soft hum of jazz, and the clinking of silverware like a blade through glass. For a split second, every sound inside the Pearl Waterfront restaurant froze. Forks hovered above plates. A waiter halted mid-step, carrying a tray of wine glasses, and a little girl with a spoonful of ice cream paused with wide eyes. The evening had started like any other elegant Friday night at the city's most luxurious dining spot. Crystal chandeliers dangled above velvet-lined booths, their golden light dancing off the glossy hardwood floors. The air smelled of seared salmon and freshly baked bread. Couples laughed over candlelit tables. Business partners shook hands, and a pianist in the corner filled the space with soft, soothing notes. At the very center table near the huge window overlooking the moonlit harbor sat Victor Grant, a man who rarely made public appearances despite being one of the most talked-about billionaires in the country. He wasn't flashy. His charcoal suit was tailored but understated. His watch simple compared to the diamond-studded accessories worn by others in his tax bracket. He had built an empire in clean energy technology, making headlines for turning abandoned industrial sites into thriving solar hubs. That night, though, Victor wasn't thinking about deals or stock prices. He had agreed, after weeks of persuasion from a friend, to step out for dinner to celebrate a new project success. His longtime friend and lawyer had just stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving Victor alone at the table with his coffee and a slice of chocolate mousse cake. He barely noticed the front doors swing open. 5 men walked in, their heavy boots thudding softly against the polished floor. Each of them wore a dark hoodie pulled low over their foreheads despite the warm indoor air. Their faces weren't fully visible, just enough shadow to hide any hint of a smile or lack thereof. At first glance, they could have been just another group of late-night diners, maybe workers coming in after a long shift. But the hostess at the podium felt her gut twist. Something in their stride wasn't casual. They weren't looking at the menu board or the interior decor. Their eyes scanned the room like predators searching for prey. "Good evening, gentlemen." The hostess greeted them with her practiced warmth, hoping her voice wouldn't waver. "Table for 5?" None of them answered. The tallest, with a jagged scar barely visible along his jawline, gave her a glance that made her step back. They brushed past her, moving in one straight line toward the center of the room, toward Victor. In a nearby booth, a young couple stopped mid-conversation. A father, helping his little boy cut through a steak, followed the men with his eyes. Even the pianist's fingers faltered for a beat before continuing. Victor looked up as the men closed in, confused by the sudden shift in the room's energy. The leader, the scar-jawed man, reached the table first. His large, calloused hand slammed down on Victor's table so hard that the coffee cup trembled, nearly spilling. "Grant," the man growled, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraping metal. "You owe us, and tonight we collect." The room fell into a stunned silence. All the chatter, the laughter, the clinking glasses, gone. Every head turned toward the scene unfolding in the center of the restaurant. Victor remained composed, but his brow furrowed. He didn't recognize these men. "I think you got the wrong person," he said evenly, trying to keep his voice calm. The second man, slightly shorter but with arms thick as tree trunks, leaned forward menacingly. "We know exactly who you are. You made millions shutting down the riverfront plant. That was our livelihood. You destroyed our lives." Understanding flickered in Victor's eyes. Years ago, his company had indeed purchased the riverfront plant, converting it into a solar energy facility. The closure had displaced dozens of workers. He had offered retraining programs and compensation packages, but apparently, for some, that hadn't been enough. Look, Victor started, raising his hand slightly. I'm willing to talk about this. There's no need. Talk. The leader's lip curled. We've been talking to lawyers, to news reporters, for years. Tonight, we're done talking. The atmosphere in the restaurant grew heavy, almost suffocating. Some diners ducked behind their chairs, sensing the hostility. A woman quietly grabbed her purse and edged toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the floor as if trying not to draw attention. Victor's usual two-man security detail had been instructed to wait outside. He disliked having them hover around him during meals. Now, that choice felt like a mistake. Through the wide glass windows, he could just barely make out the silhouette of one of his guards near the car, too far to see what was happening inside. The leader leaned in closer, so near that Victor could feel his breath. "You think your money buys you safety," he muttered, his tone almost a hiss. "But money can't save you tonight." Nearby, Amara, a 27-year-old waitress, was carrying a tray of sparkling water bottles to another table. She stopped mid-stride, her eyes darting toward the unfolding confrontation. She noticed a subtle shift in the scar-jawed man's stance, the way his right hand dipped slightly toward his jacket pocket. Her stomach clenched. Other staff members were frozen in place. The manager stood by the service counter with a phone in his hand, discreetly dialing emergency services while keeping his eyes locked on the 5 men. A toddler somewhere in the back started to cry softly, the sound puncturing the tense silence like a fragile plea for peace. Victor slowly set down his coffee cup, trying to maintain eye contact with the leader. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with ruthless investors, but this raw, unpredictable anger was different. "Gentlemen," he said carefully, "whatever your grievance is, let's handle it reasonably. Violence won't solve anything." The shortest of 5 laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Easy for you to say when you've got millions to cushion your fall. We lost everything." The leader's fist clenched tighter on the table edge, knuckles whitening. "Enough. You're coming with us. Now." Every second felt like a stretched-out eternity. The chandelier above the table swayed slightly, as if even the air was holding its breath. Amara took a step forward, her tray lowering slowly as her instincts kicked in. She was still too far to intervene, but her mind was already racing. The restaurant, once filled with music and warmth, now felt like a trap, its walls holding the fear, its elegant decor stark contrast to the danger simmering at its center. And somewhere deep in Amara's memory, long-buried training began to stir. Amara Daniels had always been the kind of person people's eyes slid past without noticing. She wasn't flashy or loud. Her dark hair was usually tied back in a neat ponytail, her uniform pressed and spotless, her smile polite but not forced. To the customers at the Pearl waterfront, she was simply another server, making sure their drinks stayed full, and their plates were cleared on time. That evening, like most, she'd come in early to help polish the silverware. She had slipped her earbuds in while wiping down the mahogany tables, listening to soft instrumental music that helped her focus. By the time the first guest arrived, she was already in her rhythm, balancing trays with practiced ease, exchanging quick jokes with the kitchen staff, and moving between tables like water flowing around stones. If anyone had asked her co-workers about her, they'd have said she was dependable, quiet, maybe even shy. None of them would have guessed she once had dreams of standing on a podium, a medal around her neck, crowds cheering her name. Long before she'd ever tied on a waitress's apron, Amara had been a rising star in judo. She'd first stepped into a dojo when she was just 10, her father bringing her to a small, slightly run-down gym in their neighborhood. She still remembered the smell of the old mats, the scuffed mirrors on the walls, and the way her first coach, a gruff but kind man named Coach Ramirez, had shown her how to fall safely before teaching her how to throw. Amara had a natural gift. She wasn't the strongest kid in her class, but she had balance, quick reflexes, and an uncanny ability to read her opponent's intentions in the shift of a foot or the tightening of a jaw. By 13, she was beating older students. By 16, she was competing in national tournaments. Her father never missed a match, clapping so hard his palms turned red. Her mother would always pack her energy bars and remind her to stay humble. Everything changed just after her 17th birthday. Her father, a hard-working taxi driver, was in a late-night accident that left him with injuries serious enough to end his driving career. The medical bills started piling up. Her mother's health began to falter under the stress. Amara had been offered a scholarship to a prestigious training program, but she turned it down to pick up shifts at a local cafe, then at a grocery store, then wherever she could earn a steady paycheck. She folded her judo uniform and stored it in a box at the back of her closet, telling herself she'd come back to it one day. But one day turned into years. By the time she joined the Pearl Waterfront staff, she had become so good at hiding her past that it felt like it belonged to someone else. She never talked about tournaments or medals, never hinted at the hours she'd spent perfecting throws and holds. On the night Victor Grant came to dine, Amara's shift began like any other. She greeted regular customers by name, refilled water glasses, even snuck an extra cookie to the little boy at table 6 who reminded her of her younger brother. The mood in the restaurant was warm and lively, the kind of atmosphere that made her job feel almost pleasant despite the long hours. Then the door opened, and the 5 men walked in. From the moment they entered, Amara felt something shift. She couldn't have explained it to anyone else. The way their eyes swept the room without interest in the menu, the way they moved as a unit instead of individuals. But her instincts prickled. She felt her body go slightly tense, the same way it used to before stepping onto the mat for a high-stakes match. Carrying a tray of desserts, she caught the faint squeak of the leader's boots on the polished floor, noticed a subtle twitch in his jaw as he scanned the diners. She also noticed a scar that ran from the edge of his ear down to his jawline. Her eyes flicked to his hands, callous, clenched a little too tightly for someone simply out to eat. She set her tray down on the side counter, without a sound, and continued to observe them. Her co-workers, absorbed in their tasks, didn't seem to sense the danger yet. As the men closed in on Victor's table, the restaurant's atmosphere began to shift. The pianist's lively tune slowed, grew hesitant, then stopped entirely. A father put his hand protectively on his daughter's shoulder. 2 teenagers by the window exchanged worried glances and lowered their voices to whispers. Amara felt her pulse pick up. She hadn't thought about judo in years, but suddenly her body remembered things her mind had long forgotten. The way to plant her feet for balance, how to control her breathing to keep her heart steady. Part of her wanted to step back, to let someone else handle whatever was about to unfold. She was just a waitress now. She wasn't supposed to get involved. But then she saw the subtle shift of the leader's arm as his hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. A ripple of unease shot through her. Was he reaching for a phone or something worse? Her breath came slower now, more deliberate, the way it had before every judo match. Coach Ramirez's words surfaced in her memory. Courage isn't about running toward a fight. It's about standing firm when you have to. Across the room, the manager had his phone pressed to his ear, whispering urgently into it, his eyes fixed on the men near Victor's table. The call to the police had been made, but Amara knew it would take time for them to arrive. Time they might not have. She shifted her stance slightly, a small, almost invisible adjustment. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees loose, weight centered. To anyone watching, she still looked like a waitress standing still, but her muscles had coiled, ready to move if necessary. Her thoughts went to her younger brother, to her father who still struggled to walk without a cane, to the long years of sacrifice that had brought her to this ordinary life. She had promised herself she'd never need to use what she had learned on the mat outside of competitions. But as the leader's voice grew louder, echoing across the suddenly silent dining room, she realized this might be one of those rare moments when standing by wasn't an option. Amara drew in a deep breath and steadied herself. She hoped the police would arrive in time. She hoped the men would back down before things went too far. But she was ready if they didn't. The quiet, diligent waitress who blended into the background was gone. In her place stood the disciplined fighter she had buried for years, hidden behind polite smiles and a black apron, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Victor Grant's coffee cup trembled on the saucer as the leader's fist remained planted on the table. The warm, golden glow of the chandelier above couldn't soften the tension coiled in the air like a spring ready to snap. "Stop pretending you don't know what you did," the leader growled. His voice was deep and gravelly, filled with years of anger and resentment. "You took everything from us. We're done asking politely. Victor stayed seated, hands slightly raised, trying to keep his voice calm. I understand you're upset. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Let's. Before he could finish, the second man to his right suddenly shoved a glass off the table. The glass hit the floor with a loud crack and shattered into a spray of glittering shards. The sound was sharp, startling. Somewhere in the corner, a child let out a frightened cry before his mother hushed him. The leader smirked at Victor's stillness. You think words will save you tonight? No lawyers here. No cameras. Just us. Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. His years of boardroom battles had taught him that sometimes silence was more powerful than words. A few feet away, Amara stepped forward slowly, deliberately, pretending to check the other tables. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her expression stayed calm, one of the many masks she perfected as a waitress. She stopped near Victor's table, setting down a dessert tray, as if it were part of her routine. One of the attackers, the youngest of the group, with restless eyes that darted between the exits, noticed her and sneered. Back off, lady. This isn't your business. For a brief moment, Amara lowered her eyes as though intimidated. In reality, she was sizing them up, shoulder width, stance, how each one shifted their weight from foot to foot. Years of judo training had conditioned her to observe an opponent's balance before they even made a move. She caught the subtle tremor in the leader's right hand as he reached toward Victor's collar and yanked him forward across the table. Victor stiffened but didn't resist, trying not to provoke the man. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The diners who hadn't already ducked for cover now crouched behind chairs or tables, clutching handbags and whispering prayers under their breath. A teenager near the window held up his phone, recording despite his shaking hands. Amara's instincts kicked in. Every fiber of her being screamed that if she didn't act now, Victor could be dragged from his seat, or worse. Sir, she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of authority that surprised even her, please let him go. The police are already on their way. The leader turned his head slowly toward her, his eyes narrowing. What did you just say? I said, she repeated evenly, let him go. He chuckled darkly. You must think you're brave. Move along before you regret opening your mouth. In that instant, the second man lunged toward her, shoving her shoulder as if to push her out of the way. But instead of stumbling back, Amara pivoted on her left foot, her body reacting faster than her thoughts, grabbing his wrist and using his own momentum to flip him forward over her hip. The motion was swift, precise, and shockingly fluid. The man's feet lifted clean off the floor, and with a loud thud, he hit the ground flat on his back, his breath whooshing out in a painful grunt. The restaurant gasped in unison. A fork clattered to the floor somewhere in the background. The man groaned, clutching his side, stunned that a woman half his size had thrown him down so easily. Amara stayed in her ready stance, her breathing controlled, eyes fixed on the remaining four. The years she'd spent away from the mat melted away. Her body remembered the techniques as if no time had passed. The third man stepped forward in a burst of anger, throwing a wide, clumsy punch at her. She shifted aside with a quick sidestep, his fist cutting through empty air. Before he could regain his balance, she used the back of her elbow to bump his arm aside and nudge his shoulder forward, guiding him, almost effortlessly, into the edge of a nearby table. The impact made the plates rattle, and the man stumbled, cursing under his breath. The leader's smirk disappeared, replaced by a sharp, calculating glare. Who the hell are you? He demanded. I'm just a waitress, Amara said, her tone cool, her stance unshaken. But her eyes said otherwise. A hush spread across the room. The diners were frozen, their fear now mixed with awe. Someone whispered, Did you see that? She took him down like it was nothing. Victor, still seated but now watching closely, felt a flicker of hope. His heart was racing, but he could sense that the quiet woman in the apron might just be his only shield tonight. The fourth man, clearly more cautious after witnessing his friend's fates, tried to circle around her to get to Victor's side. Amara shifted her position slightly, staying between them and the billionaire, her feet gliding silently across the polished floor. The man's lips curled into a frustrated snarl. You don't know who you're dealing with. Neither do you, Amara replied, her voice low but steady. The leader raised a hand, signaling his men to pause. He studied her like a predator sizing up a rival. You think you can take all of us? You're just a server in a fancy dress. Amara didn't respond. She let the silence answer for her. Her breathing slowed, her body ready to react to the slightest move. The second man, still sprawled on the floor, tried to sit up but groaned again, clutching his shoulder. His voice came out hoarse. "Boss, she's fast. Watch her hands." That warning seemed to irritate the leader even more. His pride was wounded. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone who looked so unassuming. A tense standoff followed, every second stretching longer than the last. The chandelier above flickered faintly, as if mirroring the charged energy in the air. Amara adjusted her grip slightly, ready for the next strike. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her heart beat loud but controlled, her mind laser-focused on the attacker's movements. Victor, still silent, shifted slightly in his seat, careful not to provoke the men further. His eyes met Amara's for a brief moment. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude, as if silently acknowledging her courage. Then the leader barked at the third man. "Finish her. Now!" The man hesitated, rubbing his bruised shoulder, but stepped forward again, fists clenched. Amara lowered her center of gravity and waited for the attack, ready to make her next move. The restaurant, once alive with music and conversation, had become a battleground of silence. Every diner holding their breath, waiting for the next clash to erupt. The restaurant felt as though the air had been sucked out of it. The smooth jazz that had once filled the room had long stopped, leaving only the clinking of a spoon somewhere in the kitchen and the shallow, panicked breaths of customers crouched behind overturned chairs. The glittering chandeliers above reflected scenes of broken plates on the ground, a knife on the floor glinting like a threat, and a woman in a waitress's uniform standing her ground against four large men. The leader's jaw tightened. His pride was now fully bruised. This was no longer about Victor Grant. The billionaire seated silently at the table. This was about his men being humiliated by a woman who was supposed to be nothing more than restaurant staff. His eyes burned with anger as he barked, "Take her down!" The third man, the one who had stumbled into a table earlier, wiped blood from the corner of his lip and lunged forward first, fueled by rage more than strategy. He swung wildly, his punch slicing the air. Amara stepped back half a pace, letting his own momentum carry him off balance, then slid to the side and grabbed the sleeve of his jacket. In one swift, fluid motion, she swept her leg across his shin, sending him tumbling sideways into another table. The table tipped over with a loud crash. Plates, forks, and glasses scattered like startled birds. A couple crouched behind that table scrambled away, covering their heads. The customers gasped again, some in awe, some in horror, while a man near the bar whispered, "She's like something out of an action movie." The attacker groaned as he rolled onto his stomach, trying to push himself up again. Amara didn't move to hurt him further. Instead, she stepped back, keeping her stance open but ready. She wasn't here to punish anyone. She just wanted to keep Victor and everyone else safe. The fourth man, broader and stronger than the rest, clenched his fist and approached her more cautiously than his friend had. He circled to her left side, eyes narrowed as he studied her movements, clearly learning from his friend's mistakes. Amara adjusted her footing slightly, turning to face him. Her breathing was slow and even, her eyes locked on his shoulders to catch the slightest twitch that would signal an attack. She could hear her heart pounding, feel the adrenaline pushing her to stay sharp. Suddenly, he lunged, attempting a bear hug tackle to knock her down. But Amara sidestepped again at the last second, shifted her weight, and dropped low to hook her arm around his elbow, using his forward motion against him. She yanked him off balance and flipped him across her hip. He landed on the ground with a heavy thud, knocking the wind out of himself. The crowd erupted with murmurs and gasps. Some people even clapped, quickly covering their mouths as if they weren't supposed to cheer in the middle of a brawl. Victor watched silently from his seat, utterly astonished. The quiet woman who had served his dinner minutes ago had just disarmed two men in less than a minute. For the first time that evening, his expression softened from fear into a faint glimmer of trust. But the danger wasn't over. The fifth man, leaner, twitchier than the others, pulled a small pocket knife from his jacket. The sight of the blade sent a ripple of screams through the room. Someone shouted, "He's got a knife!" A couple of teenagers scrambled further behind the counter, while a mother shielded her daughter with her own body. Amara's eyes immediately locked onto the weapon. Her training kicked in. She shifted her stance slightly, feet planted, hands raised just enough to deflect if needed. The man brandished a knife, waving it with unsteady hands. "Stay back. I swear I'll cut you," he yelled, his voice cracking under his own nerves. Amara's voice came out calm but firm. "You don't have to do this. Put it down before you get hurt." Her composure seemed to irritate him even more. With a frustrated yell, he lunged forward, aiming the blade toward her shoulder. In a split second, Amara moved. She pivoted sideways, letting the knife pass inches from her arm, grabbed his wrist mid-thrust, and twisted it upward in a controlled lock. The knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. Before he could react, she swept her leg against the back of his knees, dropping him to the ground. She released his wrist the moment he lost his grip, stepping back to keep herself between him and the weapon. The man cried out in pain, clutching his arm but unable to get up. At this point, the leader's expression darkened further. He was no longer smirking. There was only anger and disbelief on his face. His plan to intimidate Victor had gone horribly wrong, and the waitress he had ignored when he first entered was now dismantling his crew one by one. He turned toward the last standing accomplice, the broad man who was still on the floor, catching his breath, and barked, "Get up! We're finishing this together." The man struggled to his feet, limping slightly but obeyed. Both of them advanced toward Amara at once. The room felt as though the walls had closed in. The customers held their breath. A woman whispered to her husband, "She can't take two of them at the same time." Amara's face remained unreadable, but inside her mind raced. Two attackers at once meant less room for precision. She focused on keeping them apart. As the leader lunged in, aiming a punch at her face, she ducked low beneath his swing, pivoted to her left, and shoved aside with her shoulder, pushing him off balance into his own partner. The two men stumbled into each other, momentarily tangling up. She didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed the back of the leader's jacket and used her hip to flip him onto the floor, where he landed with a heavy grunt. His accomplice tried to grab her arm in retaliation, but she twisted her wrist out of his grasp and pushed him backward with a firm palm strike to his chest. He staggered a few steps before crashing into a chair, knocking it over. The crowd gasped again. Some even shouted encouragement. "You got this." The clatter of dishes, the grunts of the attackers, and the occasional shout from frightened customers created a chaotic soundtrack to the battle. In that moment, red and blue flashes appeared to the restaurant's large glass windows. Police sirens wailing in the distance, growing louder with each second. The last two attackers, realizing their situation was spiraling out of control, exchanged panicked looks. The man near the chair tried to rush for the door, but Amara blocked his path, standing firm as a wall. "Move," he growled. "Not happening," she replied. He looked at her for a heartbeat longer, then glanced at his fallen friends and the police lights drawing closer. His resolve crumbled. Slowly, he raised his hands in surrender and stepped back. The leader on the ground let out a frustrated curse, slamming his palm against the floor, but stayed down, breathing hard. By the time the police burst through the doors, weapons drawn, the fight was already over. The officers quickly secured the scene, handcuffing the attackers one by one. Amara lowered her hands, letting out a long, steady breath. Her arms ached slightly from the throws, but her movements had been controlled enough to avoid serious injury to anyone. Victor finally rose from his chair, still in disbelief but visibly relieved. He looked at Amara as if seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress, but as the person who had stood between him and danger. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars painted the restaurant's glass walls with streaks of color that looked almost surreal against the elegant chandeliers. The sirens finally faded as the doors burst open and 3 officers rushed inside, weapons drawn and voices commanding. "Everyone stay where you are." But what they saw made them hesitate for a moment. The attackers, 5 men who had come in so confidently minutes ago, were now sprawled across the floor, 2 still groaning from sore joints, one sitting with his hands on his head, one limping, and the leader glaring silently at the ground as if he couldn't believe he'd been beaten. Amara, breathing a little heavily but standing upright and composed, slowly raised her hands to show she was unarmed. The officer's eyes flicked between her and the men on the ground, their expressions betraying their confusion. Is it over?" one officer asked cautiously. Amara nodded. "Yes, they're all down. Nobody's seriously hurt." The police moved quickly to restrain the men. The one with the pocket knife was the first to be cuffed, grumbling under his breath as the officer read him his rights. The leader resisted for a second, but the look of exhaustion on his face showed that his fight was gone. He let them handcuff him without further struggle. Victor Grant stood a few feet away, finally rising from his chair. For the first time that night, he seemed to regain the calm composure that made him famous in the corporate world. He adjusted his suit jacket and stepped closer to Amara. "You saved my life," he said, his voice still carrying a trace of shock. Amara, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her, tried to smile modestly. "I just did what I had to do. Anyone would have done the same." Victor shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Most people would have run. I don't think I've ever seen anything like what you did tonight." Before Amara could respond, the restaurant manager hurried over, still shaken but clearly relieved. "Amara, I don't know what to say. You stopped them before anyone got hurt. You probably saved everyone in here." Around them, the customers began to emerge from their hiding spots. Some were still whispering to each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. Others approached carefully, offering words of thanks and awe. A young boy who had been hiding under a table earlier peeked out, then shuffled toward Amara with hesitant steps, still clutching his mother's hand. "Miss, are you a superhero?" he asked in a small voice. Amara crouched down to meet his gaze, her stern demeanor softening instantly. "No," she said gently, smiling at him. "I'm just a person who learned how to protect herself. And tonight, I want to protect all of you, too." The boy grinned shyly before his mother led him away, whispering another thank you as they passed. Meanwhile, two of the restaurant staff helped the officers gather statements from witnesses. A few customers showed the videos they had recorded on their phones, replaying the moment Amara had flipped one of the attackers over her hip. The officers glanced at each other, clearly impressed. As the adrenaline faded, Amara began to feel a faint ache in her shoulders and wrists, the kind of soreness that came from using techniques she hadn't practiced in years. She leaned lightly against a nearby chair for support, still trying to process everything that had happened. Victor noticed a slight tremor in her hands and said softly, "You should sit down. You've done more than enough tonight." "I'm okay," Amara replied, though her voice betrayed how tired she truly was. The officer who had been taking Victor's statement stepped over to Amara. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Amara Johnson," she said. "Well, Amara, I have to say, we've had our fair share of calls like this, but I've never seen a civilian handle a situation like that. You didn't just save this man," he nodded at Victor. "You probably prevented a tragedy for everyone in here." Amara gave a small, polite nod but didn't respond. Compliments always made her feel a little awkward. Once the attackers were escorted out and loaded into police vehicles, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to change. The tension lifted, replaced by murmurs of admiration and gratitude. Someone even started a round of soft applause that quickly spread throughout the room. Amara's co-workers gathered around her. One of the younger waiters, who had been frozen with fear the whole time, said, "I had no idea you could fight like that. I mean, you're always so quiet." Amara chuckled lightly. "I used to do judo competitions when I was younger. I guess I still remember a few things." Another co-worker added, "A few things? You fought off 5 guys. You're basically a legend now." Victor stood nearby, his gaze thoughtful as he watched Amara interact with the staff. He was a man used to power, to people recognizing his wealth and status, but tonight he had seen real courage, something he couldn't put a price tag on. Later, after the police had finished their reports and the restaurant had begun to settle back into an uneasy calm, Victor approached Amara again. His voice was quieter now, almost personal. "You know," he said, "I have entire teams of security guards. They're paid to protect me. but not one of them has ever made me feel as safe as you did tonight." Amara glanced away, slightly embarrassed. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. I wasn't trying to be a hero." Victor smiled faintly. Sometimes being a hero isn't about trying. It's about showing up when no one else will. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. News of the incident spread faster than either of them expected. By the next morning, videos of the confrontation were circulating on social media. Clips showing Amara's flawless throws and calm demeanor in the face of danger. Headlines called her the waitress who took down 5 men and unlikely hero saves billionaire CEO. Reporters camped outside the restaurant for days, eager to interview her, but Amara avoided the spotlight as much as she could, returning to work quietly and declining most offers to speak publicly. A week later, Victor returned to the restaurant, but this time he wasn't there for dinner. He requested to meet with Amara privately. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he told her sincerely. "You didn't just save my life that night. You reminded me what real courage looks like. I'd like to help you in some way. Tell me, do you have a dream, something you've always wanted to do?" Amara hesitated, then admitted something she rarely shared with anyone. "I always wanted to open a martial arts school for kids who can't afford training. I know how much it helped me when I was younger. I wanted to give that same chance to others." Victor's eyes lit up at the idea. "Then let's make it happen," he said without hesitation. At first, Amara laughed, thinking he was joking, but Victor was serious. Over the next few months, he funded the opening of her community martial arts school, helping her turn an abandoned warehouse into a bright, welcoming dojo for underprivileged children. The news of the partnership became another headline. Billionaire teams up with hero Waitress to help kids. Amara never let the fame change her. She still worked at the restaurant part-time, still greeted customers with the same warm smile. But now, she also spent her mornings teaching kids how to defend themselves, not just physically but with confidence and discipline.